The summer sun blazed mercilessly over Rawhide, Nevada, as Beatrice Ellsworth clutched the crumpled telegram in her trembling hands, her heart racing with a mix of terror and determination. The stagecoach had deposited her unceremoniously at the edge of town, her trunks stacked beside her like monuments to her past life, a life she had willingly abandoned for the promise of a future with a man she had never met. The year was 1875, and at 22, Beatrice had resigned herself to spinsterhood in her small Pennsylvania town, where the whispers about her ample figure had grown from childhood taunts to pitying glances. When she'd spotted the advertisement in the newspaper, "Hard-working rancher seeks bride of good character and domestic skills," she'd responded without telling a soul, packing her belongings only after receiving confirmation that Frederick Gallagher of Rawhide, Nevada had chosen her from among the respondents. "Madam, you need help with those trunks?" A boy of about 12 appeared at her side, his freckled face squinting against the sun. "Yes, thank you." Beatrice smoothed down her travel-worn dress, painfully aware that the dusty journey had done nothing for her appearance. "I'm looking for Frederick Gallagher's ranch. Do you know where I might find it?" The boy's eyes widened. "You're Mr. Gallagher's mail-order bride." His gaze traveled up and down her form, and Beatrice fought the urge to shrink into herself. I'll fetch my pa's wagon." "Mr. Gallagher's place is 5 miles north." As the boy scampered off, Beatrice felt the weight of curious stares from the town's inhabitants. A group of women stood outside the general store, their heads bent together, voices carrying just enough for Beatrice to catch fragments. "Thought she'd be prettier." Sighs of her. Poor Frederick Gallagher. Beatrice lifted her chin, pretending not to hear, but each word landed like a physical blow. She had hoped foolishly, perhaps, that in this new place she might escape the judgment that had followed her throughout her life. The boy returned with a weathered wagon, and after loading her trunks, they set off toward the Gallagher ranch. With each jolt and bounce over the uneven terrain, Beatrice's anxiety grew. What if Frederick Gallagher took one look at her and sent her back? What if the cruel whispers in town had already reached him? "There it is," the boy announced, pointing to a modest but well-maintained ranch house nestled among cottonwood trees. A split-rail fence enclosed a yard where chickens scratched in the dirt. Beyond, cattle grazed in the distance. As the wagon rolled to a stop, the front door swung open. A tall man emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. His face was sun-bronzed, with lines that spoke of years spent squinting against the harsh Nevada sun. A thick mustache framed his mouth, and his dark blonde hair curled slightly at the ends. Beatrice's heart hammered. This was Frederick Gallagher, the man who had agreed to marry her based on nothing more than exchanged letters and a daguerreotype that had been carefully posed to flatter her appearance. "Miss Ellsworth?" His voice was deep with a slight rasp. She couldn't read his expression as his eyes took her in. Was that disappointment, disgust, resignation? She'd seen all these reactions before when men looked at her. "Yes, Mr. Gallagher." She attempted to descend from the wagon with grace, but her dress caught on a splinter, and she nearly tumbled to the ground. Frederick moved forward quickly, his strong hands catching her arms, steadying her. Up close, she could see his eyes were a warm hazel with golden flecks that caught the sunlight. "Careful there," he said, releasing her once she had her footing. "Long journey." 3 weeks, she replied, trying to ignore the feel of his hands, which had lingered just slightly longer than necessary. "The last stagecoach was particularly challenging," he nodded, turning to help the boy unload her trunks. "Tommy, thank your father for bringing Miss Ellsworth out here. Tell him I'll settle up next time I'm in town." As the boy departed, an awkward silence fell between Beatrice and Frederick. She glanced around, noting the neat yard, the solid construction of the house. He had described his ranch accurately in his letters, but seeing it in person, she was impressed by the obvious care he took with his property. "Let me show you inside," he said finally, lifting one of her trunks as if it weighed nothing. "We'll have some time to get acquainted before the minister comes tomorrow." Tomorrow? She would be married tomorrow to this stranger who had yet to smile at her. The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, a solid oak table with 4 chairs, a few pieces of sturdy furniture. A doorway led to what she presumed was a bedroom, and a small kitchen area occupied one corner of the main room. "It's not much," Frederick said, setting down her trunk, "but it's clean and the roof doesn't leak." "It's lovely," Beatrice replied honestly. After weeks of travel, any permanent shelter seemed luxurious. Frederick cleared his throat. "I should tell you, Miss Ellsworth, that I've arranged for you to stay with Mrs. Abernathy in town tonight. She's the widow of a friend. I thought it might be more proper before we're wed." Beatrice felt a surge of gratitude. It was a considerate gesture, even if it meant enduring more scrutiny from the townspeople. "That's very thoughtful, Mr. Gallagher," he nodded, avoiding her eyes. "We can talk for a spell, then I'll take you to her place. I'm sure you have questions." "As do you, I imagine." Beatrice sat gingerly on one of the chairs, her hands folded in her lap. "I hope my appearance isn't disappointing to you." Frederick's head snapped up, his expression unreadable. "Your appearance," heat crept into Beatrice's cheeks. "I know I'm not. That is, some might find me rather substantial." A flicker of understanding crossed his face. "Miss Ellsworth, I'm a rancher. I value substance. Winters here are harsh, summers are brutal. I need a partner who won't blow away in the first strong wind." It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't the disgust she'd feared either. Still, she couldn't help wondering if he was merely making the best of a situation, having expected someone different from the woman who had arrived. "Tell me about your journey," Frederick said, changing the subject as he poured her a cup of water from a pitcher. Beatrice accepted it gratefully, taking a sip before launching into an account of her travels. As she spoke, she watched Frederick's face, looking for signs of regret or disappointment. Instead, she saw genuine interest, occasional concern at the hardships she described, and once when she recounted outwitting a pickpocket in Denver, a flash of admiration. "You've shown considerable courage making this journey alone," he said when she finished. "Most women would have brought a companion." "I couldn't afford one," she admitted, "and there was no one I trusted enough to accompany me." Frederick nodded as if her candor satisfied him. "We should head to Mrs. Abernathy's before it gets dark. We can continue our conversation tomorrow, after." "After we're married," Beatrice finished for him. For the first time, a small smile curved beneath his mustache. "Yes, Miss Ellsworth, after we're married." The ride to Mrs. Abernathy's was quiet, with Frederick pointing out landmarks along the way: the schoolhouse where children gathered during winter months, the church where they would exchange vows the following day, the general store run by the Henderson family for 2 generations. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a kindly woman in her 60s, with bright eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "So you're Frederick's bride," she said, ushering Beatrice inside while Frederick carried in one of her trunks containing necessities for the night. "He's a good man, my dear. One of the few around here worth the ground he walks on." Frederick ducked his head, clearly embarrassed by the praise. "I'll come for you at 10 tomorrow morning, Miss Ellsworth. The ceremony is at 11. After he left, Mrs. Abernathy showed Beatrice to a small but comfortable bedroom. "You must be exhausted, child. I've drawn a bath for you, and there's a light supper whenever you're ready." The luxury of a proper bath after weeks of travel was almost enough to bring tears to Beatrice's eyes. She soaked until the water cooled, washing away the dust and grime of the journey, if not the anxiety about what tomorrow would bring. Later, as she sat with Mrs. Abernathy over bowls of rabbit stew, the older woman studied her with shrewd eyes. "You're worried he doesn't find you attractive." Beatrice nearly choked on her stew. That is, no need to dissemble, my dear. I've seen that look before, but Frederick isn't like most men. He sees deeper than appearances." Mrs. Abernathy refilled Beatrice's bowl without asking. "He was married before, you know." This was news to Beatrice. Frederick's letters had mentioned being a widower, but not details. "What happened to his wife?" "Childbirth 5 years ago. Both she and the babe were lost." Mrs. Abernathy's voice softened. "It nearly destroyed him, threw himself into his work, hardly spoke to anyone for 2 years. It's only recently he's shown interest in living again, not just existing." Beatrice absorbed this information, her heart aching for the man she'd just met. He didn't mention that in his letters. He wouldn't. Frederick doesn't share his pain easily, but you should know what you're walking into. Mrs. Abernathy leaned forward. He needs someone strong, someone who can match his resilience. From what I can see, you might just be that woman. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Beatrice thought about Mrs. Abernathy's words. Did Frederick Gallagher see something in her letters that had spoken to him? Or was he simply a lonely man, willing to take whatever bride fate sent him? Morning came too quickly. Mrs. Abernathy helped Beatrice dress in her best gown, a dove-gray silk with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't a traditional wedding dress, but it was the finest thing she owned. "You look lovely," Mrs. Abernathy said, adjusting the small hat perched on Beatrice's carefully arranged dark curls. "Frederick will be pleased." Precisely at 10, a knock sounded at the door. Frederick stood on the porch, dressed in what was clearly his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders well, a crisp white shirt and a string tie. He'd trimmed his mustache and slicked back his hair. In his hand he held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Miss Ellsworth," he said, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look." He seemed to struggle for words. "Thank you for the flowers," Beatrice said, rescuing him from having to complete the sentence. "They're beautiful." He handed them to her with a nod, then offered his arm. "Are you ready?" "As ready as one can be to marry a man one barely knows," she replied, surprising herself with her honesty. Frederick's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Fair enough. I suppose we're both taking a considerable leap of faith today." The church was a simple white building with a small steeple. As Frederick escorted her inside, Beatrice was surprised to see several people already seated in the pews. She recognized the boy who had first brought her to the ranch, sitting beside a man who must have been his father. Mrs. Abernathy had come ahead and sat in the front row. A few other curious townspeople filled the remaining space. The minister, a thin man with kind eyes, greeted them at the altar. "Are we ready to proceed?" Frederick looked down at Beatrice, a question in his eyes. She nodded, gripping her wildflower bouquet tightly. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows, promising to honor and cherish each other. When Frederick slid a plain gold band onto her finger, a ring she hadn't known he possessed, his hand was steady, his touch gentle. "You may kiss your bride," the minister announced. Frederick leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was barely more than a whisper. But Beatrice felt it all the way to her toes. "Mrs. Gallagher," he murmured, just for her ears, and for the first time she saw a genuine smile transform his face. After accepting congratulations from the small gathering, some seemingly sincere, others clearly motivated by curiosity, Frederick drove them back to the ranch in his wagon. They traveled in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Beatrice wondered what it would mean to be Mrs. Frederick Gallagher, to share his home, his bed, his life. As they approached the ranch, she noticed something different. Colorful bunting decorated the porch railing, and a table had been set up in the yard, covered with a white cloth and bearing what appeared to be a modest feast. "I asked Mrs. Henderson from the general store to prepare a wedding dinner," Frederick explained, noting her surprise. "I thought we should mark the occasion, even if it's just the two of us." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Beatrice deeply. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. After helping her down from the wagon, Frederick hesitated, then swept her into his arms, carrying her across the threshold into what was now their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Gallagher," he said, setting her carefully on her feet in the main room. Beatrice looked around, seeing the space with new eyes. A vase of wildflowers matching her bouquet sat on the table. The bed visible through the bedroom doorway had been made with what looked like fresh linens. Small touches that showed Frederick had prepared for her arrival with care. "I had some help from Mrs. Abernathy," he admitted, following her gaze. "I'm not much for decorating." "It's wonderful," Beatrice said, removing her hat and placing it on a hook by the door. "Shall we enjoy our wedding feast before it gets cold?" They ate outside, the afternoon sun warming them as they shared the meal. Mrs. Henderson had prepared roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and even a small cake. As they ate, the stiffness between them gradually melted away. Frederick told her about his herd of cattle, his 2 faithful dogs, currently out with his ranch hand who was watching the herd, and his plans to expand the property. Beatrice shared stories of her life in Pennsylvania, carefully editing out the painful memories of rejection and ridicule she'd endured because of her size. But perhaps Frederick sensed what she wasn't saying. "Why did you answer my advertisement, Beatrice?" He asked suddenly, using her given name for the first time. "A woman of your education and refinement could have found a husband back east." Beatrice set down her fork, weighing how honest to be. "I wanted a fresh start," she said finally, "somewhere people didn't already have opinions about me." Frederick's eyes studied her face. "Because of your appearance," the bluntness of the question startled her. "Yes," she admitted, "I've never conformed to what most consider desirable in a woman." Frederick was quiet for a moment. People can be cruel about things that don't matter. "It mattered enough that no man in my town would court me," Beatrice said, embarrassment heating her cheeks. "I'm not naive, Mr. Gallagher, Frederick," he corrected gently. "I think we're past formalities." "Frederick," she amended. "I know I'm not what most men would choose if they had their pick of brides. If you're disappointed, I would understand." Frederick set down his fork, his expression serious. "Beatrice, I chose you because your letters showed intelligence, humor, and practicality. Qualities I value far more than whatever arbitrary standard of beauty is fashionable these days." He reached across the table, hesitantly covering her hand with his. "You're perfect just as you are." The simple statement, delivered with such straightforward sincerity, brought unexpected tears to Beatrice's eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. "You don't need to flatter me," she whispered. "I'm already your wife. I'm not flattering you, I'm stating a fact." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Beauty comes in many forms. Anyone who can't see that is a fool." That night, as they prepared for bed, Beatrice's nervousness returned tenfold. She changed into her nightgown in the bedroom while Frederick busied himself banking the fire in the main room, giving her privacy. When he finally entered, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hair loose around her shoulders, her hands twisting in her lap. Frederick had changed into a clean nightshirt and trousers. He stood awkwardly in the doorway. "I can sleep in the main room if you prefer, until you're more comfortable with our arrangement." The offer was unexpected and touching. "This is your bed," Beatrice said. "I wouldn't put you out of it." "Our bed," he corrected, moving into the room. "And you're not putting me out, I just don't want to pressure you." Beatrice gathered her courage. "I understand what marriage entails, Frederick. I'm nervous but not unwilling." Something flickered in his eyes, relief, desire. "We can take our time," he said, sitting beside her on the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. "We have the rest of our lives to know each other, the rest of their lives." It was a staggering thought. That night, Frederick was gentle and considerate, his touches reverent as they consummated their marriage. And when Beatrice, emboldened by his tenderness, shyly confessed her fears about her body, he silenced her with a kiss. "Every inch of you is beautiful to me," he whispered against her skin. "Every curve, every softness. Don't ever think otherwise." As she drifted to sleep in his arms, Beatrice wondered if perhaps she had found not just a husband but a sanctuary. The following days established a routine. Frederick rose before dawn to tend the cattle with his ranch hand, Daniel, and the 2 dogs, Rusty and Blue. Beatrice prepared breakfast and dinner, kept the house, and began a small vegetable garden behind the kitchen. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset, talking or sometimes just enjoying the comfortable silence that had developed between them. 2 weeks after their wedding, Beatrice ventured into town alone for the first time, a list of supplies in hand. As she tied up the horse outside the general store, she overheard voices from a group of women gathered nearby. "There she is, Gallagher's mail-order bride. Lord, she's bigger than I remembered. Poor Frederick, all that way for that. Must be desperate to settle for her." Beatrice froze, the familiar pain of such remarks washing over her, but then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Henderson, the storekeeper's wife who had prepared their wedding feast, stepped out of the group. "That's enough, ladies," she said sharply. "Frederick Gallagher is one of the finest men in this territory, and if he chose Miss Beatrice Mrs. Gallagher now, then perhaps you should consider that he sees something you don't." She turned to Beatrice with a warm smile. "Come in, dear. I've set aside those seeds you asked about in your note." Gratitude flooded through Beatrice as she followed Mrs. Henderson into the store. As the older woman helped her gather her supplies, she leaned in conspiratorially. "Don't mind those hens. They're jealous because Frederick is quite the catch and he chose you over any of their daughters." "I'm beginning to think I'm the fortunate one," Beatrice admitted. Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled. "Marriage is best when both parties feel that way." As Beatrice left the store, her confidence bolstered by Mrs. Henderson's kindness, she nearly collided with a well-dressed man exiting the bank across the street. "Pardon me," she apologized, stepping back. The man tipped his hat, his eyes appraising her. "No harm done. You must be Frederick Gallagher's new wife." "I'm Edward Thornton, owner of the Silver Dollar Saloon and several other businesses in town. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Thornton." Something about the man's smile didn't reach his eyes, making Beatrice instinctively wary. "I must say, you're not what I expected when I heard Frederick had sent for a bride." Thornton's gaze slid over her figure in a way that made Beatrice want to shrink into herself. But then, beggars can't be choosers, can they? "And after Frederick lost his land in our last poker game, I suppose his options were limited." Beatrice stiffened. "I beg your pardon. Oh, he didn't tell you." Thornton's smile widened. "Frederick's ranch is half the size it used to be, lost the north section to me in a game last winter." "Man shouldn't gamble what he can't afford to lose." Before Beatrice could respond, a voice called her name. She turned to see Frederick approaching, his expression darkening as he spotted Thornton. "Beatrice, I thought I'd meet you in town," Frederick said, placing a protective hand on her back. "I see you've met Thornton." "Just making the acquaintance of your lovely bride," Thornton said smoothly. "Congratulating myself on my good fortune at our last game." Frederick's jaw tightened. "That was my mistake, one I won't repeat, we'll see." Thornton tipped his hat again. "Mrs. Gallagher, a pleasure." As he walked away, Beatrice turned to Frederick. "Is it true? Did you lose part of your ranch to him?" Frederick's expression was grim. "Yes, it was a foolish night after too much whiskey and too many bad memories. I've regretted it every day since." "Why didn't you tell me?" he sighed, helping her load her purchases into the wagon. "It's not something I'm proud of, and I didn't want to start our marriage with tales of my failures." Beatrice touched his arm. "Marriage means sharing burdens as well as joys, Frederick. I can't be a true partner if you hide things from me." His eyes softened as he looked down at her. "You're right, of course. I'm not accustomed to having someone to confide in." He helped her up onto the wagon seat. "Let's go home. I'll tell you everything on the way." As they drove, Frederick explained that the north section of his ranch contained the best water access, crucial for expanding his herd. He'd been slowly saving to buy it back from Thornton, who had set an exorbitant price, clearly enjoying having leverage over Frederick. "That's why I sent for a bride," he admitted. "Not just for companionship, though that was part of it, but a ranch needs a woman's touch to be profitable. Selling eggs, butter, preserves, all the things a wife traditionally manages can make the difference between surviving and thriving." "You wanted a working partner," Beatrice realized. "Yes," he agreed, then added softly, "but I got so much more than I expected." The simple statement warmed Beatrice more than any flowery declaration could have. "How much do you need to buy back the land?" "Another $800. "I've saved nearly half already." Beatrice did some quick calculations. "If I sell preserves, pickles, and maybe some baked goods in town, and if we increase the chicken flock for more eggs." Frederick glanced at her, surprise evident on his face. "You do that?" "Of course," Beatrice said simply. "It's our ranch now, not just yours." When they arrived home, Frederick helped her down from the wagon, but instead of releasing her, he pulled her into his arms. "You're remarkable, Beatrice Gallagher," he said, before kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. That night, as they lay together in their bed, Frederick traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I meant what I said earlier. You're remarkable." Beatrice smiled in the darkness. For wanting to help with the ranch, for everything, your strength, your kindness, your resilience. His hand moved to cup her cheek. I want you to know something. When your response to my advertisement arrived, it included that daguerreotype you sent. Beatrice tensed. The photograph had been carefully posed to minimize her size, showing only her face and shoulders. Yes, I could tell you were trying to hide yourself, he said gently. But your eyes, they held such intelligence, such warmth. That's why I chose you, Beatrice. Not because of what you showed or didn't show, but because of what I could see in your eyes. Tears prickled behind Beatrice's eyelids. And now that you've seen all of me, Frederick's hand slid down, caressing the curve of her hip. Now I know I made the right choice. You're perfect just as you are, every part of you. Summer faded into fall, and Beatrice settled fully into her role as Mrs. Gallagher. Her preserves and baked goods became popular in town, with Mrs. Henderson happily selling them in her store. The chicken flock doubled, then tripled, providing eggs for sale and a few extra chickens for meat. Frederick had not exaggerated the harshness of Nevada life. A late summer drought threatened the cattle until a flash flood nearly washed away part of the herd. Beatrice learned to ride out with Frederick when necessary, helping to move the cattle to safer ground or better grazing. Their life together was not easy, but it was deeply satisfying. Each day they grew closer, learning each other's habits, preferences, fears, and dreams. Frederick's initial reserve melted away as he grew more comfortable sharing his thoughts and feelings with her. Beatrice blossomed under his steady appreciation, her self-confidence growing as she realized he truly saw her size as an asset, not a liability. By late October, they had saved nearly $700 toward reclaiming the lost section of the ranch. One chilly evening, as they sat by the fire, Frederick broached a subject they hadn't discussed. Beatrice, we haven't talked about children. She looked up from her mending, her heart quickening. No, we haven't. Frederick's face was serious in the firelight. After what happened with my first wife, I'm afraid. Beatrice set aside her sewing and moved to sit beside him. I understand, it must have been devastating. It was like the world ended, he admitted, his voice rough with remembered pain. I couldn't imagine going through that again, but with you, he took her hand. With you, I find myself imagining a family, children running around this house, bringing it to life. I'd like that too, Beatrice whispered, but I understand your fears. If anything happened to you, we can't live our lives in fear of what might happen, she interrupted gently. And I'm strong, Frederick, healthier than many women half my size. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I know, it's just, I couldn't bear to lose you. You won't, she promised, though of course it was a promise no one could truly make. That winter proved to be one of the harshest in recent memory. Snow piled high around the ranch house, and bitter winds howled across the Nevada landscape. Beatrice was grateful for the snug house Frederick had built, with its tight windows and solid walls. It was during the worst blizzard, with Frederick and Daniel out checking on the cattle in the barn, that Beatrice heard a pounding at the door. Opening it, she found Mrs. Henderson's son, half frozen and frantic. Mrs. Gallagher, please, Ma sent me. There's a woman having a baby in town, and the doctor's stuck on the other side of the pass. Ma says you might know something about midwifing. Beatrice had assisted at several births back in Pennsylvania, though she was far from an expert. Let me get my things, she said, already reaching for her warmest coat. When Frederick returned, she explained the situation as she packed supplies: clean cloths, a bottle of whiskey, her sewing kit for stitches if needed. You can't go out in this, Frederick protested, looking at the blizzard raging outside. A woman and her baby might die if I don't, Beatrice countered. I'll be careful. Frederick's jaw worked, but he knew her well enough by now to recognize her determination. I'm coming with you, he said finally. Daniel can watch things here. The journey to town was treacherous, the wind driving snow into their faces, the temperature dropping dangerously low. Beatrice huddled against Frederick in the wagon, grateful for his solid warmth beside her. The woman in labor was the young wife of a miner who had been trapped by the storm while checking his claim. Mrs. Henderson had taken her in when she arrived in town, already in the early stages of labor. Now, hours later, she was exhausted and frightened. "Thank God you're here, Mrs. Henderson said, ushering Beatrice into the bedroom. "She's been at it for hours, and I think something's wrong." Beatrice removed her coat and rolled up her sleeves. The young woman, barely more than a girl, really looked up at her with desperate eyes. "Help me," she whispered. "I will," Beatrice promised, though her heart raced with apprehension. She had never been the primary attendant at a difficult birth. Hours passed as Beatrice worked, using every bit of knowledge she had gleaned from assisting the midwife back home. The baby was positioned poorly, she discovered, and with gentle but firm manipulations, she managed to turn it. "Push now," she encouraged the exhausted mother. "Your baby is almost here." With a final, heroic effort, the young woman pushed, and the baby slid into Beatrice's waiting hands, a healthy boy with a strong cry that filled the room. "You did it," Beatrice said, placing the swaddled infant in his mother's arms. "He's perfect." Later, as she and Frederick made their slow way home through the diminishing storm, he reached for her hand. "You saved 2 lives tonight." Beatrice, exhausted but exhilarated, squeezed his fingers. "I just did what needed to be done." "That's who you are," Frederick said, his voice warm with pride. "You do what needs to be done, no matter how difficult. It's one of the many reasons I love you." It was the first time he had said those words, and they hung in the air between them, more precious than any jewel. "I love you too," Beatrice replied, her heart full to bursting. "More than I ever thought possible." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it a burst of wildflowers across the ranch and news that warmed Beatrice's heart. She was expecting a child. Frederick's reaction was a complex mixture of joy and terror. "Are you certain?" he asked, his face pale. "The signs are all there," she confirmed, taking his trembling hands in hers. "Frederick, this is happy news." "I want to be happy," he admitted, "but I'm so afraid." Beatrice pulled him close. "We'll face this together, just as we've faced everything else, and I promise you, I have every intention of being here to raise this child with you." As her pregnancy progressed, Beatrice continued her work around the ranch, though Frederick insisted she rest more and avoid the heavier chores. Their savings for reclaiming the land grew steadily, though more slowly now that they were preparing for the baby. It was during her 6th month, as Beatrice was selling her goods at the small market day in town, that she overheard a conversation that chilled her blood. "Thornton's planning to sell Gallagher's land to those Eastern investors," one man said to another. "Says they're offering twice what it's worth for mining rights." "Gallagher will be devastated," the other replied. "That land's been his family's for 2 generations. Beatrice approached the men. "Pardon me, but did you say Mr. Thornton is selling the north section of our ranch?" The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Madam, it's his land now, legal and proper," one said gently. "Word is the deal closes next week when the investors arrive from back east." Beatrice thanked them and immediately sought out Mrs. Henderson, who confirmed the rumor. "Edward Thornton's been bragging about it at the Silver Dollar," she said. "Says he'll make a fortune and ruin Frederick in one stroke." That evening, Beatrice paced their small home, waiting for Frederick to return from checking the herd. When he finally arrived, she told him what she had learned. Frederick's face hardened. "Thornton's been waiting for this. He knows what that land means to me." "We have to stop him," Beatrice insisted. "We have almost $800 saved. Would he accept that?" Frederick shook his head. "Not when he's being offered thousands by mining interests. And even if he would, we need that money for the baby, for expanding the herd." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I shouldn't have gambled that night. My father would be ashamed." Beatrice thought quickly. "What if we could match the investor's offer?" "How?" "We don't have that kind of money." "No, but we could get a loan from the bank," Beatrice suggested. "With the ranch as collateral." Frederick looked troubled. "That's risky. If we can't make the payments, we could lose everything." "If those investors start mining operations on the north section, it could ruin our water supply anyway," Beatrice pointed out. "We have to try." The next day, they went to the bank together, but the news was not good. The bank manager, a cautious man named Perkins, was unwilling to extend such a large loan based on the current value of their property. "I'm sorry, folks," he said, not unkindly. "But with Mrs. Gallagher in a delicate condition and the uncertain nature of ranching, it's just too risky for the bank." As they left, dejected, they nearly bumped into Edward Thornton on the street. "Well, if it isn't the Gallaghers," he said with a smirk. "I heard you were in town, trying to raise funds, perhaps. I'm afraid you're too late. My deal with the mining consortium is all but finalized." Frederick's hands clenched at his sides. "That land has been in my family for generations, Thornton. You know what it means to me." "Should have thought of that before you bet it in a poker game," Thornton replied smoothly. "Business is business, Gallagher." Beatrice, seeing the pain and rage on her husband's face, stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton, surely we can come to some arrangement." Thornton's eyes raked over her, lingering on her pregnant belly. "My dear Mrs. Gallagher, the only arrangement I would consider would involve you convincing your husband to sell me the rest of his ranch. The mining company wants the entire parcel, not just the north section." "Never," Frederick growled. "Then we have nothing more to discuss." Thornton tipped his hat. "Good day to you both. Oh, and congratulations on the impending arrival. Let's hope it fares better than your last attempt at fatherhood, Gallagher." It took both Beatrice and Daniel, who had accompanied them to town, to prevent Frederick from physically attacking Thornton after that remark. They managed to get him into the wagon and halfway home before he spoke again. "I'm going to lose my father's land," he said hollowly, "and there's nothing I can do about it." Beatrice's mind raced. There had to be a solution. What if we appealed directly to the mining consortium? "Explain the situation," Frederick shook his head. "Eastern businessmen don't care about family legacy, they care about profit." That night, unable to sleep, Beatrice slipped out of bed and went to Frederick's desk. Among his papers, she found the deed to the ranch, including the description of the boundaries before the north section was lost. She also found Frederick's original letter from his father, describing how the land had been claimed and worked by the Gallaghers since 1842. An idea began to form in her mind. The next morning, while Frederick and Daniel rode out to check the herd, Beatrice wrote a letter. She addressed it to the mining consortium, care of their representative who was due to arrive in Rawhide the following week. In it, she detailed the history of the Gallagher Ranch, the importance of the north section for the water rights, and the underhanded way Thornton had acquired it. She made no pleas for sympathy, but instead appealed to their business sense. The north section alone would be difficult to mine without disrupting water flow to surrounding properties, potentially leading to lawsuits. However, if they were interested in a fair business arrangement, the Gallaghers would be willing to discuss selling specific mineral rights while retaining ownership of the land itself. Beatrice sealed the letter and had Daniel deliver it to the hotel where the consortium representative would be staying upon his arrival. For 3 days, there was no response. Then, on the 4th day, a well-dressed gentleman arrived at the ranch, introducing himself as James Harrington, representative of the Eastern Mining Consortium. "Mrs. Gallagher, your letter was most informative," he said, accepting a cup of coffee as they sat at the kitchen table. Frederick, initially suspicious, listened intently as Harrington continued. "You raised several points my employers hadn't considered, such as," Frederick asked, "the water rights complications, for one. And the potential for ill will in the community if we're seen as displacing an established ranch family." Harrington sipped his coffee. "My employers are businessmen, Mr. Gallagher. They prefer clean transactions without complications. So you're backing out of the deal with Thornton?" Beatrice asked hopefully. Harrington smiled. "Not exactly. We're still interested in the mineral rights, but your suggestion of purchasing those rights while leaving land ownership intact is intriguing. It would save us considerable expense and potential legal headaches." Frederick leaned forward. "But Thornton owns the north section. He'd never agree to such an arrangement." "Perhaps not," Harrington agreed, "which is why I've come to propose an alternative. My consortium would be willing to purchase the north section from Mr. Thornton at his asking price, then sell it back to you at a nominal fee, provided you grant us exclusive mineral rights to specified areas of the entire ranch." Beatrice and Frederick exchanged glances. What would these mineral rights entail? Frederick asked cautiously. We would have the right to extract gold, silver, and copper from designated areas with minimal disruption to your ranching operations. We'd pay a percentage of profits as an ongoing royalty. Harrington pulled out a map. These are the areas we're most interested in. To their relief, the areas marked were mostly in the rocky northern edge of the property, unsuitable for grazing anyway. And what would this nominal fee be for returning the north section to us? Beatrice asked. The $800 I understand you've already saved, Harrington replied with a smile. Mrs. Gallagher's letter mentioned it. Frederick looked at Beatrice with amazement. You included that detail? I wanted to be completely honest about our situation, she admitted. After hours of discussion and careful review of the proposed contract, Frederick and Beatrice agreed to Harrington's terms. The consortium would buy the north section from Thornton, who would have no idea of their arrangement with the Gallaghers, and then transfer ownership back to Frederick while retaining specific mineral rights. Thornton will be furious when he learns what happened, Frederick said after Harrington departed, but he'll have no legal recourse, Beatrice pointed out. He'll get his money, which is all he really wanted. Frederick pulled her into his arms. Beatrice Gallagher, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. How did I get so lucky? You chose me, she said simply, when others wouldn't have. You saw value where others saw only flaws. Not flaws, Frederick corrected, his hand resting on her rounded belly. Just a different kind of beauty. The transaction proceeded exactly as Harrington had outlined. Thornton sold the north section to the consortium, gloating to anyone who would listen about how he had bested Frederick Gallagher. His triumph turned to rage when he discovered, a week later, that the land had been returned to the Gallaghers. You can't do this, he shouted, storming onto their property one afternoon. It was my land to sell, and you sold it fair and square, Frederick replied calmly. What the buyers chose to do with it afterward is none of your concern. Thornton's face purpled with anger. This isn't over, Gallagher. Yes, it is, Beatrice said, stepping onto the porch. You've been paid for the land. The transaction is complete. If you have any further business with us, you can speak to Mr. Harrington's lawyers. Thornton glared at her, then at Frederick. You wouldn't have managed this without your wife, would you, Gallagher? Had to hide behind a woman's skirts. Frederick's expression remained unruffled. I'm proud to stand beside my wife, Thornton, something you wouldn't understand. He placed an arm around Beatrice. Now, I suggest you leave our property before I have to remove you. Thornton spat on the ground, then turned and stalked back to his horse. As he rode away, Beatrice leaned against Frederick's solid strength. You think he'll cause more trouble? She asked. Frederick shook his head. He knows he's beaten. His pride is hurt, but he got his money. That's all that really matters to a man like Thornton. As summer turned to fall once again, Beatrice's time drew near. Despite Frederick's concerns, her pregnancy had progressed without complications. Dr. Wilson, the town physician, had checked on her regularly and pronounced both mother and baby to be in excellent health. Your size is an advantage in this case, Mrs. Gallagher, he had said during his last visit. You have ample room for the baby to grow and strong muscles for delivery. Still, as her due date approached, Frederick grew increasingly anxious. He rarely left her side, delegating ranch work to Daniel whenever possible. You don't need to hover, you know, Beatrice told him one evening as she sat knitting a tiny blanket. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I know, Frederick admitted, but last time. I'm not her, Beatrice said gently, and this is not then. You have to trust that things will be different this time. Frederick knelt beside her chair, resting his head against her swollen belly. I do trust you, Beatrice. It's fate I don't trust. Then we'll just have to be stronger than fate, she said, running her fingers through his hair. Her labor began on a crisp October morning, much like the day she had first arrived in Rawhide over a year earlier. Mrs. Henderson had come to stay at the ranch for the final week, and she sent Daniel racing for the doctor as soon as Beatrice's waters broke. The labor was long but uncomplicated. Doctor. Wilson arrived in time to assist with the delivery, though he later admitted that Beatrice had done most of the work herself, following her body's instincts with remarkable composure. "A boy," the doctor announced as the baby's lusty cry filled the room. "A strong, healthy boy." Frederick, who had refused to leave Beatrice's side despite convention, looked down at his son with wonder. "He's perfect," he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Would you like to hold him?" Dr. Wilson asked, offering the swaddled infant after checking him thoroughly. Frederick took his son into his arms with trembling hands. "Hello, Thomas," he said softly, using the name they had chosen if the baby was a boy after Frederick's father. "Let me see him," Beatrice said, exhausted but radiant. Frederick carefully placed the baby in her arms and she gazed down at the tiny face. "He has your eyes. And your strength," Frederick added, sitting beside her on the bed. "You were magnificent, Beatrice, Mrs." Henderson, who had assisted throughout the birth, slipped quietly from the room, leaving the new family to their privacy. "Are you disappointed it's not a girl?" Beatrice asked, remembering how Frederick had once mentioned wanting a daughter. "How could I be disappointed with anything so perfect?" Frederick replied, his finger tracing the baby's cheek. "Besides, we have plenty of time for more children." "You want more?" Beatrice asked, surprised given his earlier fears. Frederick smiled, the joy in his face erasing years of worry lines. "With you, as many as you're willing to give me." In the weeks that followed, the ranch house was transformed by the presence of little Thomas. Frederick proved to be an attentive and doting father, often carrying the baby with him as he worked around the house, telling him about the ranch and the legacy that would one day be his. Word of the baby's birth spread through Rawhide, bringing visitors with gifts and good wishes. Even some of the women who had once whispered unkindly about Beatrice's size came to call, their attitudes softened by the universal appeal of a new baby. "He's a beautiful child, Mrs." Perkins, the banker's wife and one of Beatrice's former critics, admitted as she held Thomas. "You must be very proud." "We are," Beatrice agreed, watching the woman's face as she cooed over the baby. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Gallagher," Mrs. Perkins said suddenly, looking up from the infant. "I was unkind when you first arrived. I judged you without knowing you. It was wrong of me." The unexpected apology caught Beatrice off guard. "Thank you for saying so, Mrs. Perkins. You've proven to be a valuable member of our community," the woman continued, "the way you helped young Mrs. Collins during the blizzard, your contributions to the Harvest Festival, and now," she gestured to Thomas. "You've given Frederick Gallagher the family he deserves after so much tragedy," after Mrs. Perkins left, Beatrice sat on the porch, nursing Thomas and reflecting on how much her life had changed in just over a year. From the lonely, ridiculed spinster of Pennsylvania to a respected wife, mother, and community member in Rawhide. All because Frederick Gallagher had seen value in her where others had not. As if summoned by her thoughts, Frederick appeared around the side of the house, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his face bearing smudges of dirt from working in the barn. "There's my family," he said, his face lighting up at the sight of them. He climbed the porch steps and sat beside Beatrice, his arm around her shoulders. "How are my two favorite people today?" "Perfect," Beatrice replied, leaning into him. "Just perfect. You know what today is?" Frederick asked, his voice soft. Beatrice thought for a moment. "Tuesday," Frederick chuckled. "It's exactly 1 year since you arrived in Rawhide, 1 year since that stagecoach brought you into my life." "Is it really?" Beatrice was surprised. With all the events of the past year, she hadn't kept track of the date. "Best day of my life," Frederick declared, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though the day Thomas was born is a close second." "Mine too," Beatrice agreed, "both days." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across their land, their complete, reunited land, Beatrice thought about the journey that had brought her here. The courage it had taken to leave everything familiar behind. The pain of those first mocking comments in town. The gradual blossoming of love between her and Frederick. And now, this perfect moment with her family. "Frederick," she said, as Thomas finished nursing and dozed in her arms, "do you remember what you said to me that first night after our wedding?" Frederick's brow furrowed. "I said many things that night. You said I was perfect just as I am. Beatrice's voice softened with the memory. No one had ever said that to me before. Frederick took her free hand, raising it to his lips. I meant it then, and I mean it now. You are perfect, Beatrice Gallagher. Your size, your strength, your heart, all of it makes you who you are, and who you are is the woman I love more than life itself. Even with all the challenges, she asked. The drought, the blizzard, Thornton's schemes, especially with those, Frederick insisted. You've shown me that together we can face anything. You gave me back my hope, my land, and now my family. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they sat in companionable silence, Thomas sleeping peacefully between them. Beatrice thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stage coach a year ago, desperate for a fresh start but terrified of rejection. If she could go back and whisper in that young woman's ear, she would tell her, "Be brave." The journey ahead has challenges, but it also has joy beyond anything you can imagine. And the man waiting for you will see your true worth, not just your appearance. What are you thinking about? Frederick asked, noticing her contemplative expression. About how sometimes the things we think are our greatest weaknesses turn out to be our strengths, Beatrice replied. And about how finding someone who sees that can change everything. Frederick nodded, understanding without further explanation. To the next year, he said, raising an imaginary toast, and all the years after that. To our family, Beatrice added, looking down at their sleeping son, and to being perfect just as we are. As the night deepened around them, they remained on the porch. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed: acceptance, partnership, and a love that saw beyond surfaces to the true beauty within. In the years that followed, the Gallagher ranch prospered. Thomas grew into a strong, kind boy with his father's quiet determination and his mother's compassionate heart. He was joined 2 years later by a sister, Margaret, and eventually by another brother, James. Beatrice's preserves and baked goods became famous throughout the territory, eventually growing into a small business that provided additional income for the ranch. Frederick expanded his herd and became known for breeding some of the finest cattle in Nevada. The mining operations on their land did indeed yield silver, providing royalties that allowed them to build a larger home, though they kept the original ranch house standing as a reminder of where their journey together had begun. Edward Thornton eventually left Rawhide after a series of bad investments left him nearly bankrupt. The Silver Dollar Saloon was purchased by a former cattle driver who transformed it into a respectable establishment where families could dine together. As for Beatrice, she never lost the sense of wonder at how her life had unfolded. Sometimes, when visiting the general store, she would overhear newcomers to town asking about that large woman married to the Gallagher fellow, only to be quickly informed by Mrs. Henderson or Mrs. Perkins that Mrs. Gallagher is one of our most respected citizens. Size has nothing to do with character. On their 20th anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children and grandchildren play in the yard, Frederick took Beatrice's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers as naturally as breathing. "You ever regret it?" he asked, answering my advertisement. Coming west to marry a stranger, Beatrice looked at the life they had built together, the thriving ranch, the loving family, the respect they had earned in the community. She thought of the shy, insecure woman she had once been and the confident, fulfilled woman she had become. "Never," she said, squeezing his hand. Not for a single moment. Frederick's smile, still able to make her heart skip after all these years, lit up his face. "Nor I," he said. "You were exactly what I needed, Beatrice, perfect just as you are." And in the golden light of the Nevada sunset, surrounded by the fruits of their shared life, Beatrice knew that sometimes the greatest journeys began with a single step of courage and the recognition of one's own worth in the eyes of someone who truly saw you.